Terry from Mindful Moves. So today again, I share autism with you. And the reason for this is because over the last couple of weeks, I've been consulting with schools, with teachers and parents, and really doing our best to help children on the spectrum. While I was doing this, chatting with speech therapists, and that I twice was told that we are living in a day and age where psychologists choose not to diagnose this because there's no treatment. And of course, another time, another place, another video. But of course, that is, in my mind, not the case. When we know this and people understand what autism is, and we change the way in which we're responding and intervening, offering these children and people support, then we begin to remove barriers that they are having. And so they are no longer disabled in these areas. And so we absolutely have to start figuring out, what is this word? What does it mean? What does it look like in the classroom? Because we are sitting with many, many children who are either borderline, living with autism, masking it, not getting diagnosed, or even being misdiagnosed. And we, the people on the ground, we don't need that label in order to switch up and change and intervene in a way that's more supportive of these children so that they can experience more success. So I go to share my screen with you now. And let's just see if we can make it big. There we go. And so we're going to be looking at working with children who are on the spectrum. So what is ASD? There's been many times that changed the names, the labels. When my little one was young, autism referred to low functioning children and Asperger's to the higher functioning children. And already then there was this change moving over to autism referring to those, who have a difficulty with speech, the verbal being probably more non-verbal, and Asperger's more of a social issue. So children with ASD are referred to as atypical, and there are differences within their brain that make them think differently to the neurotypical. So the person with typical neurological thinking patterns, people. So nobody knows what causes it still. There's so much research being done. There's so many different theories, but many researchers do agree that there possibly is a genetic predisposition triggered by toxins. Environmental toxins within the environment, but toxins within the body too. So we see here, we refer to the quadrant being the 4 areas in which these children battle. So it could be speech, sensory processing, rigid thinking and play, and socially. And just as my little things go, each to a different degree. And so it becomes our job to map these children and the gifts and talents and weaknesses out to better support them. So in saying that, if you've met one person on the spectrum, you've met one person on the spectrum. This makes it very difficult and different to children like who have ADHD and that, because children with ADHD, I know, just to back up, they're learning in the same, along the same path as anybody else. But when we have children who are on the spectrum, they tend to learn in a different way, and we have to start understanding that to help. So people with ASD have splintered abilities. That's the one thing we hear of. We also need to remember the word yet as we deal with them. So even if they're battling right now, we need to understand there's always potential to learn a skill if they just are offered patience and time. When we hear a teacher say there's something wrong, but I don't know what, another big thing coming out, these children who are referred to as weird or awkward or quirky are also often these children who are battling and haven't been quite diagnosed yet. So they might be quiet and withdrawn, or they might be active and odd. These children often tend to be diagnosed as ADHD. They might be sensory seeking or sensory defiant. They might be high functioning or low functioning. And for this reason, each child with ASD must be treated as an individual, and the treatment put into place needs to support the child using their strengths to challenge and develop the areas that are weaker. The big thing about this is that many of these children battle with anxiety, and we go into that. But children on the spectrum battle with a lot of anxiety, and this comes from primitive reflexes that haven't integrated, or just trying to navigate in a world that seems different. It doesn't make sense to them. Stimming and echolalia are things that these children will do to try and regulate themselves when stressed. So what is stimming? So we also see flapping with the hands, but we also refer to a repetitive behavior called stimming. So an action or motion a person on the spectrum will do. Anxiety and excitement might cause this person to stim. Echolalia is a repetition of seemingly meaningless words or sounds, and this may be also a way and a means to process or self-regulate. So similar to stimming, but on that more vocal level. We have to notice. So noticing these kids with this knowledge in mind, we can notice their behavior. So when we see repetitive movements that are back and forward movements, we know that this is actually the body's way of trying to organize and center itself again. When we see children spinning and turning, and this is all children, they are often doing this intuitively because they are bored and not receiving enough stimuli. We need to notice their posture, if they're fidgeting, how much they're yawning, and these are indications to change gear or even to allow for movement break. So as we look at the 4 areas, this is how they come across in class and to what extent they might be discriminated against, especially when we don't understand that this is something that they might be living with. So in terms of speech, it affects language and written language as well. So they might battle with nonverbal communication, metaphors and sayings, putting themselves in another person's shoes, inferring questions, application questions, reading between the lines, idioms and sayings. Everything is understood in a very literal sense. And we also see the science of language is difficult for them to pick up on. Knowing that the younger kid who was learning language between ages 0 to 7 was usually right-brained, being able to, in a situation, pick up on the emotion and the vibes and the unsaid things, giving more meaning to the development of language at that time. So rigid memos discriminate against these children, and I do my best to ask teachers not to stick to memos that have been moderated by HODs, okay? But when marking these things, to ask, but is this question wrong? And to consider bringing that half mark in, and then taking this opportunity to teach these children how to better respond to certain test questions. Sensory processing. So these children battle with sensory processing. This often makes them incredibly anxious. They often can battle with auditory processing. So often my son gets penalized and gets told that he didn't follow instructions, he doesn't listen in class. And then we have this conversation about auditory processing and understanding the language going back to speech, the way in which instructions were given. These children also may have allergies and sensitivities. They may present as having concentration problems, and this is also due to many of their reflexes being out and the stimuli that comes in calling for their attention. So these children often battle with mental fatigue as they have to override a lot of the stimuli coming in just to be able to sit still and listen in a lesson. They also might battle with foods and textures, and they might find noise and light and even busyness overwhelming. This can lead to a meltdown. So not a tantrum. A tantrum is a behavior that calls for attention and is manipulative. A meltdown is just purely getting to the end of one's tether. And so they should never be responded as the same thing, as one in the same. So rigid thinking and play. People with ASD have very strong interests. This can be seen as a strength, as they can become obsessive about the idea or topic. They spend much energy on trying to fully grasp something that they love. Use this as a way in which to establish a space to reach out or a platform to teach other concepts. And they will battle with putting down this idea. So just be aware of that. Don't get frustrated with them. Start finding ways in which you can change topics of conversation, and of course, ask them about other questions that might cause them to shift a little bit in terms of where they're at mentally. Social skills, lack of eye contact is only one example. And some kids actually don't have this. The children who are masking have learned very quickly that I need to look at somebody, so they tend to override this. So although it's a red flag, you have many children with very good eye contact who are also on the spectrum. These children may battle to read the temperature of a room or a conversation. And this makes connections difficult and even more stressful for them. So again, that came in when our kids were right-brained when they were younger. Many of the children on the spectrum, because they are atypical, they don't think and use their brain the same as others. They were more left-brained when they were younger. These were the clever kids who could read, who could write, who could do numbers, but battled with social things, battled with friends often, because of that being more left-brained when they should have been right-brained, picking up on the temperature of the room and conversation. So they often know when something is off, but they don't always know how to respond. And they often respond in inappropriate ways. And again, just to have patience with these people, they're not being rude. They often get accused of being rude and abrupt. They say it how it is. They don't candy coat anything. They don't mince their words because they haven't learned how to manipulate language in this way for personal gain. So patience is key. The key word for everyone on the spectrum is the word yet, as I've said before. They haven't grasped the concept yet. So skills that neurotypical people grasp naturally need to be learned by those on the spectrum, but they're often very capable of developing these skills, learning how to cope. So just be patient and kind, knowing that they're just needing to anchor an abstract concept in a very tangible way that makes sense to them. They battle with relationships, so they often create a science on how to read people's situations and concepts. And of course, if they're battling to pick up the science, sometimes we have the psychologist who steps in to teach them a way forward in these places. This does take time and a large amount of energy and effort on their part, accompanied by anxiety of the unknown, which we all experience. And so just in having that in mind to have empathy and compassion for these people. As I said before, all of this causes mental fatigue. Okay, so as their brains need to be very busy overriding all these active reflexes, all the stimuli coming in, while analyzing absolutely everything, they reach this place. When they reach this place, they may seem like they aren't listening. They may act out. And these are all ways that just go to show the amount of effort it takes and possibly the mental fatigue that they're experiencing. So, but what do they really need? What they really need is a break, a space to just go back and retreat and come back when ready and safe to do so, or to move and to move from their learning profile, which they do have, back to more whole brain thinking, where they can work through these problems. So what do we need? Do not add to their stress by shouting at them or punishing them for what it is that you're seeing, but rather be the voice of reason. Help them to identify their own abstract emotions and teach them to give voice to these. And so when a child is getting upset, I'll often say, I can see you frustrated. Can I help? And talk them through that, but labeling first that abstract emotion so they begin to understand this feeling is frustration, this feeling is disappointment, this feeling is anxiety, and how do I deal with each of them? So bringing the verbal instruction and way to deal with whatever is going on. So in doing so, we teach them acceptable behaviors and ways to ask for help when they're feeling overwhelmed. Lay out options and then discuss the pros and cons of each of these. If you are still feeling overwhelmed, frustrated and powerless as a person yourself, who possibly is on the spectrum, as a teacher, as a parent, you know, there are many people out there who do really good work with autism and those with ASD. It's just a matter of research and reaching out and asking for some support. And so, yes, reach out to us. What can we do? Well, we can consult with you. For me, I've had many years experience personally, as well as in the classroom. We also have courses that are available to assist. And what I do with all these children is I really offer profiling sessions. As we said so early, you know, each child is completely unique, and we have to start mapping out their strengths and weaknesses and how they present with their personality type and having, you know, autism or Asperger's. How does that come into the mix, and how does it present, and what is the way back from the meltdown? And so, yes, please, more than anything, what you do need to know through this is that you are not alone. So for more information, you're welcome to just go over to our website. There I also have got some resources there, as well as my personal story for you to read. And hopefully it inspires you to just continue no matter what, because these things are most definitely treatable and people can most definitely have full and whole lives. See you again soon. And I trust that that was all that it needed to be for you today. Take care.